Okay, what I want to talk about in this video is some of the things in section 2.3, in particular pages 44, 45, and I guess 47. Okay, so we'll start out with this example. I'll have a sentence, and like Appiah does, the author, on the bottom of page 44, I'll call this sentence S, but my sentence is going to be Rod is in his office. Okay, so that is Dr. Wilson. And so what I want to get at, or what I want to analyze, is whether or not it's the case that I know this sentence. And what we have for a definition of knowledge in this section is this one on page 47 from Descartes. So for Descartes, in order to know something, you have to believe it, it must be true, and you must have indefeasible evidence for the belief. Okay, so the it that we're talking about here, you have to believe it, is our sentence, whatever it might be. So in this case, it's Rod is in his office. So in order for me to know this, to have this knowledge, to know that Rod is in his office, I have to believe it, it must be true, and I must have indefeasible evidence for the belief. Okay, so if I happen to have the belief, then that first condition is taken care of. For everything we're doing in this chapter, we're not going to be concerned with truth per se. We're just going to take it for granted that when we're looking at an example, if we want it to be true, then it is true. So that's not going to be, if it's false, then knowledge is not an option. So in everything we're doing, we'll assume that what we're talking about is true. But the real thing that we are concerned about in this section is whether or not our belief is justified. And so in this section, our question is, do we have indefeasible evidence for the belief? And in fact, what I really want to get at is a little bit of explanation / review of what we mean by indefeasible evidence. Okay, so now back to page 44, we have this definition of consistent. Two sentences are consistent just in case it is possible for them to be true at the same time. Okay, so the two sentences that we're going to be interested in are first S, our sentence, Rod is in his office, and second, what Appiah at the bottom of page 44 calls an evidence sentence. And the evidence sentence just reports the evidence that you have for whatever it is you're focused on. So I'm in my office, Rod's office is across the hall, and here's my evidence that he's in his office. Okay, so my evidence sentence is, I hear a man's voice that sounds like Rod's coming from his office, or coming from the direction of his office. Okay, so then our question is, are these two sentences consistent? That is it possible for them to be true at the same time? And yes, definitely it's possible for this sentence, Rod is in his office, and I hear a man's voice that sounds like Rod's coming from his office. for these two both to be true at the same time, so yes, they are consistent. No problem there. Okay, so now I'm looking at the bottom of page 44, and suppose that we have a sentence and we're looking at the evidence for it. Okay, so this stuff we already did. Here's what we're interested in now. What we mean then by the evidence being consistent with the sentence S being false is that it is possible for the evidence sentence should be true and S should be false at the same time. Okay, another way, so S being false, so I'll write this out. Is the same as, we'll just say equals, not S. Those two are the same, or that is not S being true. So if it's false that Rod is in his office, then it's true that this sentence, or it is the case that this sentence is true. Rod is not in. Okay, so you can do the analysis either way. Just stick with S and question whether S is false, or flip it around to not S and question whether not S is true. Okay, so we want to know is, I'm going to do it this way, not S consistent with our evidence sentence. And again, that doesn't change. Oops. Okay, I hear a man's voice and the whole nine there. Okay, so is it possible for these two, this thing and this thing, to be true at the same time? And the answer there is yes. I mean, it's a little bit less likely that these two will be true at the same time, but it's definitely possible. So Rod's not in his office, and for some odd reason, there's a recording of his voice playing from his office. Or Rod's not in his office, and I hear his brother's voice, who sounds just like him, or whatever. Okay, so these two are consistent. Okay, so now I'm looking on the top of page 45, and so here Appiah says, evidence like this, which is consistent with the falsity of the sentence it supports, is called defeasible evidence. That is, when we have, right mode here. So when we have evidence, that is, when we have our evidence sentence and the evidence sentence is consistent with the falsity of the sentence it supports. That is, it can be true. The evidence sentence can be true at the same time as not S can be true. Okay, so if that's the case, then we have defeasible evidence. All right, so here, since these two can be true at the same time, this evidence sentence is, this is the evidence I have, and it's defeasible. Oops. I'll try that again. Okay, it's defeasible evidence. If, on the other hand, okay, back to what Appiah is saying, if, on the other hand, you have evidence for the truth of a sentence S that is so good, that is, you have an evidence sentence that is so good that it is not possible, that is totally impossible, that S should be false when the evidence sentence is true. So that is, it's impossible for whatever your evidence sentence is to be true at the same time that S, whatever S was, so Rod is in his office, is true. So if that's the case, then you have defeasible evidence. And there's an example just following this little blurb that I have here. Okay, so if we go back to our definition of knowledge that we're focused on here, our definition in 2.3, which is on page 47, then we see that, okay, I believe it, so check. Let's say that it is true, that's fine. But I don't have indefeasible evidence. Everything we just looked at there demonstrated that the evidence was, what did I just say? I do not have indefeasible evidence. Everything that we just looked at there demonstrated that the evidence is defeasible evidence. It's good evidence, but it's defeasible. It's not indefeasible, so I fail here. And so according to this definition, I don't know that Rod is in his office.